Hello everyone, my name is Colin Dutt, and today I will be presenting about software version control, specifically Mercurial and Git, and even more specifically, we will be going over the differences between the two, comparing and contrasting them, and looking at when one is more appropriate to use over the other. So first of all, what is version control? Well, Wikipedia defines version control as a class of systems responsible for managing changes to computer programs, documents, large websites, or other collections of information. In layman's terms, version control is a way to keep track of the changes that have been made to the software you have been working on. You can track changes by the date they were made or the person that made the changes. This is extremely helpful in software engineering these days, as software projects can get so large and need so many developers at the same time that it helps to have a history of the software changes in case bugs were introduced or a design change is needed. Let's look at a little history. The first version control system for software engineering was published in 1977 and was called Source Code Control System. It was developed for an IBM system computer and is a little different from the version control systems we use today. But this highlights how important version control is. Almost as soon as we began making large pieces of software, we started using version control to keep track of what was going on and where. So it is important to know how to use them and how to choose which is best for you, because we have so many choices today. And this is what we're going to be taking a look at here soon. Now, there are three overarching categories of version control systems: local, centralized, and distributed. In a nutshell, local version control systems keep track of changes in a special format on the hard drive, and old changes can be retrieved and recreated at any point. Centralized version control systems have one global repository that every developer commits to from their workstation. This, however, leads to the downside of a single point of failure, which leads to the third type of version control systems, and the one we are going to focus on today. Distributed version control systems have multiple repositories, one for each developer, which takes care of the single point of failure problem from centralized version control. This also allows developers to work offline better than with centralized version control, and makes common operations such as commits, viewing history, and reverting changes much faster, since they do not need to communicate with the central server. Distributed version control systems were not very popular until the release of Mercurial and Git in 2005. These both came about because the creators had been using a free version control system that would no longer be available to them for free. These two distributed version control systems remain extremely popular to this day, with Git being the most popular by a lot, taking more than 80% of the overall version control market share, while Mercurial only has about 2% of the version control market share. It is still used by some big names in the tech industry, such as Facebook, Mozilla, and Google. Now let's take a closer look at these two distributed control systems. Mercurial is a free distributed control system that is meant to be very simple and easy to understand. Let's take a look at some of the basic Mercurial commands. hginit creates a new repository. hgcommit saves the changes in the current repository. hglog lets us see all changes in the repository. hgpull brings all of the changes from another repository into the current repository. hgpush sends all changes from the current repository into another repository. And finally, hgmerge joins different lines of history together. Git is also a free distributed control system that is meant to give the developer more control when altering history and making branches and commits. Let's look at some basic Git commands. Git init or git clone are used to create a new repository or to create a copy of an existing repository. Git add adds files and directories to be tracked by Git, as new files or directories are not tracked by default. Git commit records the current status of objects in the repository into a commit. Git status prints information about the current status, including what has changed from the last commit. Git branch is used to manage branches both locally and remotely within the repository. Git checkout switches from the current branch to another given branch and will create a new branch if the given branch does not exist. Git merge adds the history of one branch to another branch. Git push uploads all committed history to a remote copy of the repository. And finally, Git pull downloads a remote copy of the current branch and merges any changes to the local version. Git and Mercurial are very similar in a lot of ways. Obviously, they are both distributed version control systems, so they share a lot of the same commands, such as init, add, and commit. With each system, developers work on their private repositories and, once done, merge them into everyone else's work. Both workflows are similar in that you initialize a repository, edit files, add them to be committed to your local repository, commit them to your local repository, and finally, update the remote repository with your changes when you are done. Git and Mercurial also have many differences, the most obvious being their command keywords. When using a Git command, you start the command with the Git keyword and follow it with the command, while Mercurial uses the keyword HG, which is the symbol for the element mercury. When looking at the usability of the two programs, most developers agree that Mercurial is easier to use, while Git provides more complex options for developers, which can require more training time and can cause mistakes if developers are not careful. When considering the safety of the two programs, it is widely accepted that Git provides more advanced safety features to those who know how to use them. However, if users do not know how to use the program very well, things can get pretty messed up in a single push or merge. This gives Mercurial some credit when considering that it protects its users from themselves. Finally, we will consider branching, as it is an important part of version control systems today. Branching provides developers with a way to work on different versions of code at the same time, so they do not have to mess with the parts of their code that already works. Git branching is considered extremely effective since branches are only references to a certain commit. This allows them to be easily manipulated and makes them easy to follow when using for different aspects of a project. Mercurial branches are much more difficult to deal with and can cause headaches when trying to figure out how to get them to work. You can get them to work similarly to Git branches, but it can take some getting used to. Now that we know the major and minor differences between Git and Mercurial, pause the video for a bit and think about the following questions. What considerations would you make when choosing what version control system to use? If you had a large, experienced team, which would you choose? Now, pause the video for a second and take a moment to think about these questions. Now that you've had a moment to think about them, some things that you might have thought of to consider is the size and experience of the team for the first question. For the second question, I would choose Git since the team is more experienced and can handle a more complicated version control system. And since Git is better at handling larger software projects with large teams. Now that you know a little more about version control, hopefully you come away from this presentation more prepared to make an informed decision about which one to choose in the future. Thank you for watching.